What is up guys, Blue Spooky here with a 2-hour Megamix. That is 2 hours of new true scary stories to this channel, as much as I'm able to track. If you guys enjoy this long video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. Doing all of those ensures I can keep making daily videos for a long time to come, especially these longer ones. If you guys have any thoughts about the stories in this video, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as one of my favorite parts about doing this is reading your guys' comments, even if I don't always get the chance to reply to them. Without further ado though guys, I will let you enjoy the next 2 hours of true scary stories, and I will see you again at the end of the video. Thanks for watching. I live in North Hollywood, California. My brother and I live together in a nice quiet neighborhood where not even car break-ins happen. Trust me, in Northern Hollywood there aren't many neighborhoods like that. A few years ago, my next-door neighbor Jillian adopted a dog to keep her older dog company while she was at work. I work from home myself, so she would often ask me to let her dogs out around lunchtime, and sometimes once more around 4 p.m. if she would be working late that day. One day, Jillian called me and said she had a meeting after work. She asked if I could go over twice that day, and I said that was perfectly fine. I went at around 12 p.m. the first time. I should explain the basic layout of Jillian's house. As you walk through the front door, it's a pretty straight shot from the door through the living room and dining room to get to the back door. Obviously, that leads to the backyard. The bedrooms and bathroom are on the left side of the house, and the kitchen is on the right side. Jillian likes to close all the doors before leaving, so only the dining room and living room are open for the dogs to hang out in. As I made my way through this time, I noticed that all the doors were closed as usual. I greeted the dogs and took them into the backyard to do their business and run around a little. While we were outside though, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched from somewhere. I started to feel very uneasy. I heard the dogs go back inside. As calmly as I could, I made sure everything was locked up. Then I walked home. At around 4 p.m., I started back over for my second visit. As I approached the front door and put the key in, I had this sinking feeling in the middle of my chest. I shrugged it off and went inside so I could take care of the dogs. As I walked over to them, I noticed that one of the bedroom doors was now wide open. I let the dogs out and sort of thought back to my first visit. I was fairly certain that all the doors had been closed. I thought to myself that maybe Jillian had forgotten something and come back to the house briefly while I was away. Probably just forgot to tell me. I pulled out my phone and called her up real quick. "Hey, did you come back home earlier? I'm here to let the dogs out and I saw your bedroom door was open." What she said next chilled me to the bone. "No, I'm just getting in my car to head home now. Why?" I wanted to run and scream, but I decided to act as normal as possible. I didn't know if whoever had opened that bedroom door was still lurking around the property. I told Jillian I was calling the cops and hung up the phone. I let the dogs into the backyard, then went back inside. I announced loudly and calmly as I could, "Bye guys, see you tomorrow." I exited the house and dialed 911. I heard Jillian's front door open suddenly, and a tall, thin man emerged from the doorway. He began to sprint towards me. I ran as fast as I could towards my home. I opened the door, which was not locked, and slammed the door behind me. I locked the man out, and that's when I heard him call from the other side. "I'm coming for you." Before I could hit the call button, I heard a window break in the kitchen. I realized my brother was not home, and I had to fend for myself. I ran into my brother's room and went to his closet. I found the baseball bat he kept hidden away. I could now hear the man walking around my house, searching for me. He came into my brother's room and looked under the bed. I stood up from my place in the closet and prepared for him to find me. I was sobbing as quietly as I could and praying I would get a swing in before he got to me. He stood up and made his way over to the closet. He opened the door, and I swung at him right away. I smacked him hard in the chest, and he fell down to the ground. He managed to get right back up and knocked the bat out of my hands. He then shoved me to the ground and started dragging me out of the room. In the hallway, we found my brother standing there with a knife. Turns out he had come home after realizing he'd forgotten his wallet. He rushed the man and stabbed him in the shoulder. The intruder moaned as he fell to the floor, and my brother kicked him in the face over and over. He told me to call the cops. Just then, I heard sirens outside. Jillian had already called the cops after we hung up. She knew it was her crazy ex-husband who had broken into her house, and the cops dragged the man out of my home. He later confessed that he had planned on killing Jillian. When he saw me there, he decided to kill me and anyone in my house as well. He's not well in the head, if you catch my drift. I hate to think of what would have happened to me if my brother hadn't forgotten his wallet. This happened when I was 15. My dad and I were driving my sister from San Diego to Austin, Texas, where she would start her new job. She had lived in Guam for a year, and she couldn't afford to ship her car all the way to Texas, only to California. My dad and I loaded up her car with things she'd need and began the drive all the way to the Lone Star State. We had been going for a few hours now, and decided to stop in El Centro to get some gas and use the bathroom. I didn't have to go myself, so I volunteered to pump the gas. As my dad and sister went inside, there were a few other cars at the pumps and in the parking lot. There was a man, about 5'10" and average sized. I noticed he was at the pump adjacent to ours. As soon as I went to throw some trash away, he began giving me this weird look of sheer malice and hate. Being the unathletic turd I was highly intimidated. My father walked out of the store and told me he'd bought $35 worth of gas. He didn't seem to notice the strange man glaring at me as he climbed into the driver's seat. He looked down at his phone, and I began pumping the gas and tried to make the best of the situation. My sister walked out of the store soon after. I averted my eyes to look at her. At that point, I saw out of my peripheral vision the man reaching into his pocket and producing a knife. He then harshly whispered to me to get into his car, or else he was going to stab me. I went into full defense mode. I shoved the guy as hard as I could and knocked him off balance. I guess I'd taken him by surprise. He hit the gas hose that connected to his car, knocking it off and spraying him in gasoline as he fell backward. I hung up my own gas hose and yelled at my sister to get into the car and for my dad to fire it up. We jumped in the car together. I think my dad had seen the knife because he floored it the hell out of there. I saw the guy jump into his white Chevy and turn it on. But by that time, we were already out of the station and heading back to the interstate. I told them what happened, and my dad drove even faster to get back to the interstate. I looked out the back window and saw that same white Chevy weaving in between traffic, seemingly chasing after us. He pulled up right next to us, and that's when I noticed there was someone else in the passenger seat. The passenger rolled down his window and pointed a handgun at us, screaming to pull over. Instead, my dad hit the gas, bringing us up to almost 100 miles per hour. The Chevy was still next to us. Suddenly, my dad shouted at me and my sister to get down and brace ourselves. The Chevy abruptly swerved and sideswiped us, but the collision caused them to lose focus, sending them into the far lane, where they hit the back of a semi going at least 90 miles an hour. As we sped away, we saw their whole front end had caved in completely, and they were forced to pull over. We got off the next exit and went to a police station. We reported the incident. After about an hour, they told us they'd found the broken down Chevy. Both the assailants had left it behind and fled on foot. They fled before the truck driver could even get out of his rig, apparently. When I described the appearance of the guy, the police knew he was a serial offender. There were reports of him luring children into his car all across the Southwest and bringing them back to Mexico. He was wanted on several counts of kidnapping. After a few days, we were able to continue our move to Texas, and the rest of the trip went off without much of a hitch. I'm a 22-year-old female from South Texas. The town where I live in is quite small and still growing. Due to the lack of entertainment there, we often go to Houston or one of the other big cities nearby. Given this situation, my family decided to surprise me with tickets to a concert to one of my favorite artists. I would be joined by my sister. I was quite excited and thought it would be a really good time. It was a 3-hour drive or so there and back. We had a wedding to go to the next day, so we decided to save some time and take some back roads to get there faster. I wish we could have stayed at the hotel. After the amazing concert, we decided to get some Taco Bell and start heading back. Mind you, this was around 11:30 p.m. or so. Everything was going perfectly fine until the low tire pressure signal came on. My sister pulled over and got out of the car to check on things. I could hear her cursing. The tire was not only low on pressure, but completely deflated. My sister and I were both raised to be independent. You can always save a few extra bucks by doing things yourself. It goes without saying that we both knew how to change a tire. While we were in the process, a man suddenly emerged from the nearby tree line. He was about 6 foot tall, but what really caught my eye was how well dressed he was. He wore a suit and had this creepy smile. He walked up to us and offered to help, but we kindly declined. After that, he just kind of stood there and continued to stare at us. We made up a white lie and said our parents were already on the way and they would be there any moment to help us out. We told the man this in hopes that he would leave now. Eventually, he did do so. He just turned around and walked back into the tree line without saying another word. I thought it was quite weird how he'd just randomly come out of the forest at the perfect time. Just when we thought it was over, though, the man came back out, except this time there was a knife in his hand, and he was donning a black mask over his face. I started to freak out. He ran up to our car and sunk his knife into the rear passenger side tire. Me and my sister scrambled back into the vehicle through the driver's side doors and locked it just in time. And that's when a white truck pulled up behind us. We thought it was someone coming to help us, but that's when we saw 3 more men wearing black masks exit the vehicle and surround our car. The 3 men started banging on the windows, while the guy with the suit got on top of the hood and began to drag his knife across the windshield, making this awful screeching sound. At that point, we had called the cops, but there was no sign of them showing up anytime soon. One of the men banged on the window so hard I thought they were going to break, and that's when the man in the suit jumped down off the hood. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a gun. I thought we were dead in that instant, and I began to pray. My sister started screaming hysterically. The guy walked up to the rear passenger side window and pointed his gun. He fired a shot inside, sending shards of glass all over the back seat. The first shot didn't fully break the window, so he pulled the trigger again. My heart had never raced so fast in my life. The masked man used his gun to move away some of the remaining glass and unlock the back door. During all this commotion, I had retrieved my pepper spray from my travel bag. The man made his way inside the car, and in that moment I turned around and emptied the entire bottle right into his face. The man immediately put his free hand over his eyes and began to scream. He pointed the gun at my sister. In that moment, I couldn't breathe. It was like the entire world was frozen still. For whatever reason, the man didn't pull the trigger. That's when I heard the fast-approaching police sirens. The men fled and jumped back into their truck within seconds. We saw their taillights disappearing into the night. The police arrived too late. We gave our report and I tried my best to give a description, but most of what came out of my mouth was nonsense. I was obviously pretty shaken up over what happened. The police combed the area. It turned out we were at the wrong place at the wrong time. These men had set up nails on the road and were just waiting for their next victims. They were possibly human traffickers. The police put out an APB on the truck, but as far as I know, they never found the men responsible. Always be careful when you're driving on the back roads of Texas. These men could still be out there, looking for their next victims. Always be sure to bring something to protect yourself with. It just might save your life. Hello everyone, my name is Luke. I'm French and I'm 26 years old. I currently live in Australia since May of 2019. I met my girlfriend Mina, who is of Japanese origin, about 1 month after arriving in Australia. We met on a strawberry farm where we both worked. We worked on it for several months until the health crisis impacted the planet. So, job on the farm was over, and we had to find something else. At that moment, the two choices available to us were go back home and separate, very hard for both of us, or stick together and try to get through this ordeal. Spoiler alert, we chose the second option. We decided to leave this seasonal job in the countryside and go to the city together to try and find new jobs. Bingo. Good news for me, an employer wanted to hire me to work for a local Australian football team. We'll call this employer Kathy. Kathy explained to me that I could work for managing the football team, but that currently, because of the health crisis, we'd have to wait until obligatory confinement periods passed and the football season resumed. I explained that I did like the job, but it would be quite hard for Mina and I to remain unemployed during that entire confinement period. We had to pay rent, food, and all that stuff still. Luckily, Kathy had a heart as big as the entirety of Australia. Sensitive to our situation, she explained that she had a solution for both of us. She owned a holiday home several kilometers from Brisbane, which belonged to her father, who was now in a retirement home. We could stay there for free during the period we couldn't work. At the time, I didn't really believe it. I told myself something fishy was clearly going on, but faced with this situation, I had no choice but to accept. It was the only real solution for us. We accepted the proposal together and moved into this house a few days later. We played Animal Crossing, Splatoon, Mortal Kombat, and did many other things together during this confinement period. Everything was going pretty well. We did feel a little bit lonely though. The house was very isolated in the countryside. Apart from that, everything seemed perfectly fine. We had a garden, a kitchen, basically everything for free. We really couldn't complain or be choosers here. I would like to reiterate once again that this house was in the middle of nowhere. We had just a single neighbor, John, who took care of his horses and whom I got along well with, but he rarely stopped by to visit the place. He was basically the only guy around. Other details which will be important. In this house, there's a main entrance door with a large blurred window. so you can distinguish things through it. There's another wooden door behind the house which opens onto a veranda connected to the home. The house is single-story, so there are no floors, and there are no curtains on the windows except in the bedroom. 3 or 4 weeks after moving in, Kathy called me to tell me some good news. I could finally go to work. The first day of work, everything was like clockwork. I loved what I was doing, and it was a very good working atmosphere. The only problem was we were still staying in Kathy's father's house, which was several kilometers away, and I didn't have a car. It took an hour and a few separate train rides to get there, the same coming back as well. Like I said before though, I couldn't really complain. Mina was still looking for work. She hadn't been as lucky as me, so she was mostly stuck at home while I was working. The second day of work at 5 p.m., I was getting ready to end my day when I received a surprise call from Mina. She was whispering, and her voice was trembling. I knew immediately that something was wrong. I'm going to switch to her point of view so you get as much detail as possible. I was quietly playing Animal Crossing on the sofa when I saw a silhouette through the blurred window of the main entrance door. It was not the right shape for it to be Luke or even John, and I understood that very quickly. I stared at this figure, who was now motionless in the front door, and that's when I tried to get up and slowly move away. At this point, the individual outside started frantically banging. My heart started racing, and I didn't know what to do. I tried to be as discreet as possible, so the individual would think no one was home or would open the door for them. I finally decided to hide in the bedroom closet because it's the only room where you couldn't see what was happening from the outside. Huddling between the hangers and our clothes, I was praying for the person outside to just go away. At that point, I remembered there was a second door behind the home that was free to access. I couldn't remember if it had been locked or not. Feeling a surge of courage, I decided to rush through the house in order to reach this door. During this race, I saw the individual passing in front of one of the kitchen windows. The conclusion? This man was also going around back to check if the door was open. Panicked but already in the race, I decided to run to the end and close the door before the man tried to open it. When I finally pushed the latch, I heard the individual trying to push open the door. Switching back to my perspective, completely frightened, she went back to hide in the cupboard, and that's when she called me. I had a little bit of trouble understanding what she was trying to say to me on the phone, since her voice was trembling and she was so panicked. I tried to calm her down so I could get more clear information on what was happening. After a minute where I asked her to focus on breathing and listen to me, she managed to calmly describe to me the events occurring. Being next to Kathy, I asked her if anyone was supposed to pay a visit to the house or something. No one was supposed to come or even know that the house was being inhabited. I knew I had to get home as quickly as possible and ensure Mina was not in any danger. I asked her to stay in the cupboard and call the police and call me back directly afterwards. I was going to rush home. She decided to stay on the phone with me. Not the best solution, I admit. She should have called the police, but she was in a total state of stress and panic, and I guess having me on the phone reassured her. I ordered an Uber and told him to go as fast as possible. She explained to me that she no longer heard anything outside, no one knocking at the door or lingering around the house. I advised her to stay in hiding. She decided to take a peek outside the cupboard, though, and confirmed to me a few minutes later that the silhouette was no longer visible behind the door, and no one seemed to be around the house. I arrived at 5:45 p.m. I rushed over to Mina and wrapped her up in a big hug. I explained to her that now that I was here, there was nothing to fear anymore. At 6 p.m., it started to get completely dark. I checked the locks and tried to get this off our minds by playing games and watching anime together. That was a mistake, though. In my relief at finding her safe with no further problems, I omitted the detail of greatest importance. Check around the house, you idiot. Why didn't you check the house first? It was now time to go to bed. At 1 a.m., the neighbor's horses woke me up. I could hear the hooves. Mina, still not really asleep, asked me what the noise was. I told her it was just the neighbor's horses. At 3 a.m., there was a series of sudden frantic knocks on the back door. It was super strong, like they were trying to break it down. I can tell you, I discovered what adrenaline was at that moment. I was sure it was the same guy as earlier, and he had one intention all along, to get into this house. Mina was screaming. I started to shake all over. I had this feeling of being paralyzed while still expending a ton of energy. It's very strange to explain. Eventually, I got out of bed, planning to barricade the back door and call the police. As I left the room, though, I heard a dull metallic noise. He had opened the back door and was on the veranda. There was only one last door with a poor wooden wedge under the small space at the bottom that separated us. At this moment, it was certain he was going to get in. I'm not really the type to fight, and I'm not worth much in a fight anyway, but I had no choice. I grabbed the biggest knife I had and placed myself in an angle in which I had the best chance of taking him by surprise. I was ready to defend myself with a knife if need be, to defend Mina, who was paralyzed in fear on the bed. Honestly, I could already see myself explaining to the courts why I'd stabbed a guy. I was scared, no doubt, but at the same time, hearing Mina's screams filled me with determination. She threw me the phone and told me to call the police. I did so, still in the same position and ready to defend myself. The phone call must have lasted 40 seconds. The policeman on the phone understood straight away that this was a serious situation. He asked me for the address and said they were on the way immediately. At this moment, I found myself a little more relieved while remaining on lookout. This is where the individual began to mumble incomprehensible stuff that didn't really assure me. From the noise he was making, he was either a guy who was heavily drunk, on drugs, or mentally ill. He must have figured I'd called the cops, but he was still reaching for the handle and trying to get inside. At 3:10, the cops finally arrived, 4 officers and 1 dog. As I saw them approaching, I heard noises behind the door. The individual seemed to get scared and give up. I heard the dog barking, the policeman shouting, and the man moaning. Finally, it was finished. The individual was neutralized and taken away in the police car. The officers stayed with us to talk to us and get our version of the events that happened, to find out if we wanted to file charges or not. The officer told us there was a chance this man was a patient at a rehab center nearby. He also told us he wasn't sure of anything at the time, and they would have to verify his identity. Ultimately, we never heard back from the guy or the police, though. After that night, I admit we had a lot of trouble sleeping. I contacted Kathy to explain to her what happened to us. She was shocked and felt somewhat responsible as well. Unfortunately, there are no real answers as to who the guy was, nor what he wanted. I even ended up wondering if maybe this was someone who was actually in distress and went about things very poorly, in need of help. I guess we'll never really know. So yeah, I guess the lesson is Australia is great. This happened to me and a friend of mine a couple years back at our local church. For the sake of this story, my name will be Jamie, and we'll call my friend Mark. We were pretty young back then. I was 13 and Mark was only 12. This church is located in San Antonio, Texas. It also happens to be one of the oldest churches in the area. This all began at around noon sometime. We ended up hanging around church after Mass, waiting for our monthly youth meeting to begin. We still had 2 hours to kill, so we headed for a trail that went through the churchyard and continued past the grounds into a nearby preservation. This trail was commonly used by cyclists, but we like to walk these trails just to kill some time. Also, to feel a little bit rebellious in our young minds. As we walked by this bench that was no more than a minute into the trail, my friend noticed something sitting on it. There was this dirty pillow, and there was no one nearby. "I dare you to take a nap and wait till someone wakes you up," Mark said jokingly. I wisely declined that offer. God knows where that musty pillow must have been. We assumed it must belong to one of the many homeless people we'd seen around town. It would also be quite rude to use someone else's things without their permission. Eventually, we got done with all our stuff and started to head back to Mark's house. His dad only lived about 7 minutes away, and we'd usually walk there from church on the nights where I would be staying with Mark. This was one of the few days I actually got to spend the night at Mark's house. Mark's dad had to work early the next morning, and he was asleep by 10 p.m. By midnight, me and Mark were still up, trying to figure out what we should do. "Bro, we gotta get out of here. Don't you want to do something else besides playing video games all night?" I admitted that the games were getting kind of boring, but there was really nothing else to do. "Well, what else did you have in mind?" I asked him. "Let's head back to that trail. We'll bring some flashlights and a pocket knife for protection." That sounded like a good idea to me. I was eager to do something different, so I agreed to go. Now, we went out at night more often than you might probably think, but we'd never been on the trail this late at night. We put on some sweaters, grabbed some of his dad's pocket knives and some flashlights before heading off to explore. As we walked down the dimly lit road, there was this sensation that something was not quite right settling in the pit of my stomach. I ignored that feeling and told myself I was just being paranoid. As we approached the trail's opening, Mark shined his light through the trees. There were crickets chirping, along with the wind rustling the leaves. After about a minute or so after entering the trail, I thought I could hear some footsteps behind us. They seemed to slowly die down as we continued on. Since this trail was about 3/4 of a mile long, it took a little while for us to reach the church grounds. While passing by the bench we encountered earlier that day, we discovered the dirty old pillow was still there. Mark said he could actually take a nap now if he wanted. I shrugged it off and told him, let's just go to the end so we can turn around and go home. This place is kind of giving me the creeps. By the time we got to the end, I had forgotten all about those faint footsteps I'd heard earlier. We turned around and started to head back the way we came. At this point, we were a ways away from the bench, but still close enough to see it. We stopped dead in our tracks as we were startled by the sound of footsteps running. "What the hell was that?" I said under my breath. Before I could figure out what to do, I noticed that pillow was now missing from the bench. I pointed it out to Mark, who was scanning the surrounding area with his flashlight. He pointed it at the bench area. As he did, we both noticed something standing behind a tree, a pair of eyes staring daggers at us. Mark quickly moved the light away and seemed to have the same idea I did. We should act like we hadn't seen anything and go home the other way. I nodded and followed his lead. As we turned around, though, we heard the sound of someone sprinting full speed right for us. Mark took off and I quickly followed behind him. The assailant was much faster than us and closing in quickly. I grabbed Mark and pulled him off to the side after switching his light off. I told him in a quiet voice that we should hide in the brush and wait for the man to pass, then run back. We heard the distinct sound of heavy breathing nearby and saw a large, dark figure through the bushes. When we were sure the figure had made its way past us, we made a break for Mark's house. We ran out of the trail and kept going. When we arrived at his home, we were out of breath and covered in sweat. To this day, we don't know who that was waiting for us behind the tree, nor do we know exactly what he was planning on doing if he'd managed to catch up to us. A couple of years ago, my husband and I took a trip to Yosemite. We stayed outside the park in El Portal. One evening, while we were driving back from the valley, I noticed that the headlights caught what appeared to be someone lying down on the side of the road, both feet pointed out towards the street. I told my husband there was a person laying in the pitch black on the side of the highway. He knows I love true crime and was absolutely certain what I had seen were trash bags. I was so certain, though, I just kept saying, "No, I saw a body. I know that was a person." We made our way back to the hotel, and as we were about to park, my husband looked over at me. "You're really sure about this, aren't you? You want to go back and look?" I was desperate. As we drove by the same area again, I saw the feet clearly. I had my husband turn the car back around and yelled at him to stop the vehicle. He rolled down his window and called out, "Are you okay?" There was no answer. One more time, even louder. Suddenly, a woman dressed in all black sat up. She was wearing a nice down jacket, black pants, had her purse and 3 water bottles. Her makeup was done very nicely, and she seemed very sweet. I could tell my husband was absolutely shocked. I asked her where she was headed. She said she was trying to get to the Chevron station up the road, and that her mom was going to meet her there to pick her up. This woman looked to be in her late 40s, mind you. I knew something weird was going on. From where we found her, the Chevron station was another 7 miles away. She said that in her mind she thought it was only a mile from her hotel and that she'd be able to walk that distance. We offered her a ride and she climbed into the back seat. Not before I grabbed a thick scarf to wrap around my neck and my pepper spray. As we drove, we tried to ask her questions, just general chit-chat, you know. I asked her why she was laying on the side of the road in the pitch black. She said she'd gotten tired while walking and had to lay down and give up. It was winter and she had no hat or gloves either. I could tell this woman looked very fragile. Once we arrived at the Chevron station, she thanked us, got out of the car and sat down on the bench in front of the closed Chevron station store. We offered to stay with her until her mother arrived, but she insisted she'd be fine. I reminded her there was no cell reception in the area and triple-checked that she didn't want us to wait with her. We drove back to our hotel and noticed there were now 2 police cars in the parking lot. They had not been there the first time we arrived back that evening. I told my husband I knew they had to be there for that woman for whatever reason. I calmly walked over to one of the cars and asked if they were looking for a missing woman. The officer told me they were and asked if I'd seen her. I explained the situation and that I felt like the woman had something very bad happen to her. He thanked us for picking her up and giving her a ride. He couldn't tell me what happened, but thought leaving her and going somewhere else was a smart choice. I asked that he go check on her at the Chevron station just to make sure she was okay. I was now realizing that whatever had occurred must have been at the same hotel we were staying at. That evening, I looked up a local police log and found a serious domestic violence dispute had broken out at the hotel. The woman had been beaten severely and was so terrified that she was willing to walk in the dark without a flashlight just to get away. It's my guess that after walking a mile from the hotel, she was in so much pain that she needed to lay down. I got the distinct feeling she thought she might actually die there. She couldn't go back to the hotel because she'd already escaped and gone to the front desk to call her mom. Her husband knew she'd be there and would have come after her. The front desk called the police for her while she escaped. It's my understanding that the man who injured her was her husband and was soon arrested. I was always worried about her and wondered whether she managed to escape. Did her mom pick her up in the end? Did she get home safe? Now my husband always listens whenever I tell him I see a body on the side of the road. When I was 12 to 13 years old, I was waiting for my friends at the entrance to a large park in my city. While I was waiting, a van pulled up next to me, and the man inside rolled down his window. "Hey there, kid, what are you up to?" I replied I was waiting for my friends. I paced back and forth, slightly away from the van with each step. "Where they coming from?" he asked. I answered, "From the metro." "Hop in, I'll give you a lift there." At this point, I knew this guy was a creeper. I told him no thanks and began to walk away. He insisted I accept his lift. I left the park entrance. He pulled into the parking lot, did a U-turn, and drove out of the park along the road I was walking on. Having noticed what he was doing early on, I walked really fast to a hole in the fence of the park and climbed in. I guess he realized from that point he'd have to do an 8 to 10 minute drive to get back to the area I was, and he gave up and left. I met up with my friends a bit later and told them the story as well. I'm not sure if this technically counts for the theme since my dad wasn't alone. My mom and I were asleep for this though, and neither of us even knew it happened until he told us years later. Effectively, this means he was by himself in this situation. I've been itching to tell this story anyway, so here goes. This is more my dad's story than mine, obviously. I was really little at the time, and I don't really remember where we even were. My dad was driving us home from some trip one night, with my mom and I asleep in the back seat as previously mentioned. We lived in Hemet, this kinda dinky town in Southern California at the time. We had to take what I'm pretty sure was Route 74 to get back there from wherever we were. Back then, pretty much nothing had been built out there yet, probably the mid to late 90s or so. It was just this big, long, lonely stretch of nothing out in the middle of the desert. It was around 1 a.m. or something like that, so obviously there weren't that many people out there. And my dad, being the only one awake, was already pretty on edge. Just up ahead, he noticed an intersection, and the lights began to change. He didn't see any cars coming at all, and it was just flat nighttime desert. You'd definitely see them if they were. For some reason, though, his hair began to stand on edge, as he puts it. Sure enough, as he looked a little bit closer, he could see someone walking out into the middle of the road. Already, he didn't like this one bit, but maybe they were just lost or some shit, right? Out of his peripheral vision, though, he noticed other people hiding in the bushes on the side of the road. He pretty quickly realized these people were trying to surround his car. Some things about my dad. He's a mechanic, so he tends to acquire a lot of cars, and we had a lot of different ones through the years we lived there. He'd also been through a ton of shit. Alcoholism, drug abuse, a load of motorcycle accidents. He's got crushed discs in his neck and lower back, but somehow he's still an extremely sharp guy. The car we had was a Lincoln Town Car, so a good 400-pound beast of a car. My dad knew nothing good could come from what was happening. He always liked to tell me that if you're in your car, that's the best weapon you can have. He just floored it. He hit the dude that had walked in front of the car. The dude went tumbling over the hood, and my dad just kept on driving. The next day at work, he started to think about it, and obviously he felt kind of bad. Maybe their car had just broken down or something, and they were in the bushes for privacy. He didn't really know. He decided to mention it to a sheriff just in case. Maybe he knew someone who got hurt and didn't deserve it. Instead, the sheriff flipped out about it and started calling everyone looking for people who went to hospitals in the area with those injuries. It turned out there'd been a nasty string of carjackings in the area, usually ending with the people in said cars being killed. My dad mentioned cars being found in the desert, burnt up with the people inside them still. I don't know if there's ever been any news on it or anything, so I can't really confirm that. Basically, the sheriff told my dad he did the right thing. Hemet was kind of a retirement town at the time, and Lincolns are kind of seen as old folks' cars. So there's a good chance these people thought my dad was some random old nice person, not a grizzled mechanic with his family sleeping in the back seat. pretty chilling to think about what might have happened if my dad was the type to have stopped for them. Driving from North Carolina to Northern Virginia at night alone, typically about a 3-hour drive, some terrifying shit can happen. This is 100% real, and I'll never forget that moment. I was a 22-year-old man at the time of this story 4 years ago. About halfway through, I needed to stop off at a rest station to very quickly take a piss. I remember wanting to be super fast so I could meet my friends on time in Virginia. I pulled into a spot and I saw another car pull in right next to mine. I remember thinking that they were parking pretty aggressively, but I didn't really look much more or think anything beyond that. Instead, I went to piss. As I was leaving the bathroom, I saw this guy meander in and lock eyes with me in the fucking weirdest way I'd ever seen in my life. He had this black and white checkered shirt like a chessboard and neon green long pants. Quite a memorable outfit to say the least. As I passed him by, I expected him to go to the bathroom, but after maybe 5 seconds, he came out immediately walking after me. He hopped into his car, which of course was the one aggressively parked right next to mine. I was weirded out at this point, but surely now this would be all over. No. I drove for another 30 minutes, only to notice that a car had pulled up in the lane next to me and was driving at the exact same speed. I rolled down my window trying to see if this car was trying to tell me something. Maybe I had a taillight out or something. Keep in mind, I'd already long forgotten about that creep from before. Well, fuck me when I realized it was him, and he was not looking at the road at all. He was staring unblinkingly at me. He kept on making these faces, like he was gagging and smiling. He smiled like the Joker and kept licking his lips. It was terrifying. At this point, I flipped him off and sped up. This was also the exact instant when I saw his car lights behind me and realized that one of the headlights was out. In a startling moment, I realized that this same car had been behind me since I left North Carolina almost 3 hours ago. The man had been following me the entire time. With no clue what to do here, I couldn't pull over and I couldn't just drive like a lunatic either. In hindsight, maybe I should have called the cops. At the time, I didn't really know what to do though. I just sped up and tried to get him out of my line of sight. Eventually, I did manage to lose him a bit, only for him to come flying down the road 10 minutes later in front of me and turn his blinker on for the next exit. He slowed down, so I'd either have to take the exit too, or he'd try and force me off the road. I put my blinker on and waited for his car to approach mine. Then I floored it, and I mean really floored it, close to 120 miles per hour. The man tried to move into my car only to shoot past and into the exit, and I never saw him again. It still haunts me that he was following me that entire time. If I hadn't been so quick in the bathroom, I wonder what would have happened to me. I was driving near Santa Monica College one day. It was a nice and sunny day with lots of people out on the street, hanging out, enjoying the weather. I was quite tired and more than a little distracted. I was stopped at a red light waiting for it to change when my passenger door suddenly opened. A man got right into my car. I froze. This guy was in his late 20s or early 30s, tall and very strong looking, wearing jeans and a hoodie covering his face. He had a very angry look on his face. "Drive," he said. I'm a woman, and at the time I was 19. I was not exactly the biggest fighter. I was terrified. Every serial killer article I'd ever read flashed through my mind, and I tried to think of what I could use as a weapon, but there was nothing around me. All I could do was what he said. I didn't even get the chance to speak much. He had me drive him around Los Angeles for about 2 hours. Occasionally, he'd have me pull over to the side of the road and then just rant angrily to me about how fucked up his life was. All women are cunts and should be killed immediately. That was his main theme. Women suck and don't deserve to live. During those ragey monologues, he'd slam his fists into everything, kick the dashboard, and just go absolutely insane. I did what I think any person would do who's physically outmatched and trapped near an angry, crazy asshole. I acted submissive and unthreatening. I agreed with everything he said, so he wouldn't try to hurt me. Eventually, he wound down and gave me the great compliment of saying I might be one of the few women who didn't deserve to be raped or killed. Then, just as soon as he'd come, at a random intersection he had me stop. He jumped out of the car and ran away and disappeared. I was physically fucked up for days afterward. The adrenaline and the terror it kicked up was so strong, it felt like it actually crashed my brain. I had the freakiest walk home one night. So you get the picture. I grew up out in the country, smack dab in the middle of nowhere. Former farming community, but was mostly just people who wanted a bit of land at this point in time. When I was in my later teens, I would frequently walk home from a friend's house in the middle of the night. I never really thought much of it. It was a 2-mile walk in the middle of the night with nothing but the moon to light your way home. I was actually out with someone one night when they got a call saying someone had died or gotten sick or something or other. This person also happened to be my ride. They were supposed to be driving me home, but because of this emergency, he asked if he could drop me off from approximately where I'd usually walk from anyway. I said sure, even though it was slightly further and I wouldn't be going my usual route. Whatever, he had an emergency, so it was fine. I get out, my friend takes off, and I start walking. No more than 2 minutes into my walk, though, I hear rustling in the bushes, and something starts running towards me from the road. Another animal hops out of the bushes, doing the exact same. 2 massive guard dogs, trained Dobermans. I instantly remembered why I never took this route. It was due to the fact that the people who owned this corner lot were extremely private. Gates and fences surrounding the property all over, with a massive home right in the center. Numerous rumors of nefarious activities surrounded this area. Anyway, I started running as fast as I could. I thought to myself, you fucking idiot, they're gonna catch you in no time. Instantly, I turned around. I made myself as big as possible and let out as loud a roar as I could. I ran straight towards these dogs. Surprisingly, they took right off into the forest and presumably back home. I continued on my walk, thinking that would be it. All was fine and dandy until I turned the corner, about 20 minutes from my home still. As soon as I turned this corner at the intersection, I could hear some voices outside. It was around 2 a.m. at this point, so this was fairly unusual for this area. I proceeded with caution and silence as I was growing closer and closer to these 2 voices. Suddenly, I could make out what they were doing. They were digging a fucking hole at 2 a.m. in the dark and freezing cold. I saw one of the men snap to attention. "Hey, what was that?" The digging stopped right away. I was 40 meters away from where they were digging. I did what any semi-rational person would do. I hid. I crept into the bushes and hid in the ditch for a good half hour. The men searched for a while before they gave up. I worked up the courage to sneak further into the forest and around so I could get the fuck out of there and into my bed. They returned to digging and talking the entire time. They didn't once mention what they were digging for, but I wouldn't either if I was digging a hole in the middle of nowhere to hide something. I got home and went right to sleep. It didn't sit right with me though, so I drove by slowly the next day during daylight to check it out. There was a hole that was freshly dug and filled in, right in the middle of the driveway. I kept my mouth shut about this for a long time. I didn't even tell my parents about it until a little over a year ago, when they were moving away from that area. Their response was to tell me about all the murders that had occurred previously on that street. My dad laughed and said, "Sounds like they added another one." Huh. Good times, I guess. My dad is a very logical person, and I'd like to think I'd take after him myself. A lot of nighttime terrors I got through by calmly trying to understand what was going on and figuring out what was happening systematically. Those are branches from a tree outside my window, not hands tapping on the wall, etc. Our house was quite old and much of the support structure was made of wood, so I'd become quite accustomed to the occasional creak at night. Our house was also right next to a bend in the road, just along a speed bump. Often, this meant the car lights would shine in through the windows. Heavier vehicles passing on the road would even gently shake the house and cause some small creaks as well. For a lot of my childhood, I didn't have a door on my room. Not even a wall really, since my room was defined by 3 walls and a closet serving as the 4th one. This meant that at night, I would often look out into the hallway of the house while trying to fall asleep. Every car that passed the bend in the road would trace their headlights across the hallway, accompanied with some minor squeaks and cracks from the road. When I was smaller, I used to get very scared of this. My dad got tired of me crying though, so he laid in bed for about 10 minutes with me to see what I was so scared of, then proceeded to systematically explain to me what was happening. Once I actually knew what was going on, I started being a lot less scared. One night, I saw some more lights, but these ones were moving a bit differently. Instead of coming out through the windows, it looked like they were coming from up the stairs. I saw a figure and a shaped cone of light slowly going down the stairs and moving down the hallway. At first, I thought it must be a very slow car illuminating someone out on a walk or something, but the lights normally stopped a meter or so from my door, and that's as far as the windows would allow them to go. The figure continued to move down though, until now I could actually see it was a person, standing with 1 foot barely inside my room. It was a woman. She placed her hand on the wall. I could now see the woman standing there incredibly clearly. She was wearing some sort of dress and covered with a see-through drape kind of thing. It kind of almost reminded me of a wedding dress or something. I was stunned, staring at her as she stared in at me. I don't know for how long we were like this. It seemed she was just staring at me with her head tilted for almost an hour. Knowing the state I was in though, it must have likely been about 10 seconds or so. Just as suddenly as she'd come down the stairs, she turned around and sprinted down the hallway. For some reason, I just calmed right down immediately. Unnaturally, almost like shock, I felt as calm and relaxed as ever. I fell asleep and woke up sometime later because my parents finally came home. I wanted to say something about it in the morning. I came downstairs to my parents yelling at my sister because she'd snuck out while she was supposed to be watching me. It turns out she'd left me home alone that entire night, so I have no idea who that woman was. When I was about 16 or so, I tried to get a good night's rest before a very important sectional track meet the next day. I was tossing and turning all night. Competition nerves and the heat radiating throughout the bedroom were keeping me wide awake. The windows were closed and the fan was turned off. All I could hear was the wind faintly slapping against the window from time to time. My door would typically be closed to eliminate the sounds that cornfield wildlife produced at night. At the time, my queen-sized bed was perfectly centered across the room from my 2 swivel door closet. On the right side of the closet door hung some deer antlers that I'd found searching the cornfield mentioned before. It was probably around 2 a.m. at this time. The whole house remained silent, with complete darkness. Not a single ambient sound to be heard. As I was just staring up at the ceiling and walls, trying to follow its framing around the room to fall asleep, I heard a subtle, faint scratching noise appear from my closet. My eyes shot directly to it, as my perception became slowly accustomed to the darkness in the room. I stared and started to sweat, concerned and trying to wrap my mind around what could have caused that sound. Again, a subtle scratching noise, almost inaudible. Likely due to the silence of the night, it caused me to really focus on anything that stimulated my hearing. I could not look away from the direction this scratching was coming from. I didn't see any changes in the closet door though as the scratching continued. About 15 seconds went by of just staring at this unchanging closet door. I was staring, holding my breath in terror, trying to decide what to do, when those scratches became bangs. Now I could visually see the door moving in and out of its framework, and I heard the rattling of the deer antlers clasping together on the wall. Whatever was inside my closet was banging on the door hard now. The bangs continued, and it felt like an eternity. I jumped 5 feet from my bed to the bedroom door to turn the doorknob and escape that terror. I sprinted down the hallway panicking. I managed to clear all 10 steps that led to the main floor of my house in a single leap. I ran to get help, but when I returned, the noises had stopped. To this day, I have no idea what the sound was or what could have produced it. I checked the closet, but afterward I didn't find anything. I tell my friends this story sometimes, and they have no logical answers either. It remains a mystery I'll probably never solve in my entire life. What is up guys, Blue Spooky here as always. It's been a while since my last outro, so I figured I'd do one again. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, or subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any constructive criticism you'd like to share with me, be sure to leave it in the comments below. Although I can't respond to every comment I get nowadays anymore, I still do read all of them, and I enjoy hearing your guys' thoughts and opinions, especially of your opinions on the stories in the videos. If you guys have some stories you'd like to share yourselves, please be sure to check in the description below the video. There will be links to all of my social media, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Be sure to send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has a type, and how you'd like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. Also, please be sure to properly format and add as much detail as you feel comfortable with to ensure the most probability your story makes it into a video. I think that's pretty much it for now though. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. This happened a few days ago, and I'm still pretty shaken up about it. I only just thought to post it, so here goes. On Friday afternoon, I got a call from my friend named Sarah, asking if I wanted to meet her and another friend named Lisa at Dunkin' Donuts, as we hadn't seen one another in quite a while. Dunkin' Donuts is a 15-minute walk from my house, so I decided I would walk. Besides, the weather was fine. I got to Dunkin' Donuts and found where Sarah and Lisa were sat and went to join them. As we were chatting, I noticed that my sister Elena was sat at a table in the corner of the room with her friend Jess. For some context, my sister and her friend are both 18. My sister still lives with my parents, whereas I live alone. I excused myself from the table for a moment and went over to Elena and Jess's. They were sat at a table with 3 seats, so I sat down with them and said hi. They both jumped a little bit like they were really startled, but then looked more relieved than anything to see me. Immediately, Elena leaned in and whispered to me, "Don't look now, but that guy in the blue shirt, I think he's been following Jess and I." I glanced over and saw a middle-aged man sat at a table, facing slightly away from us. He's walked past our table a good 5 times in the past 20 minutes to go to the bathroom, but he always walks slower when he passes by us, she continued. I told them they were most likely being paranoid, and there was nothing to worry about, but for their peace of mind, I offered to leave with them so they wouldn't feel as worried. I walked back over to my table and explained the situation to Sarah and Lisa. Both of them laughed it off and assumed my sister was just being paranoid. Literally, about a minute later though, I saw that same man get up from his seat and walk toward the bathroom. My eyes followed him, and sure enough, he walked extremely slowly past Elena and Jess. In fact, it was almost comical how obvious he became. Both of them looked in my direction, and I nodded to show them that now that I had seen him, I believed them. About 5 minutes later, I went to the toilets myself. On my way, I passed Elena and Jess and told them I was ready to go whenever they were. They both agreed that they wanted to leave right now. I told them I was going to go to the bathroom for a moment, and we could leave after I had done my business. Elena had come in her car, so she was going to give me a lift back. I went into the toilet stall, did my business, washed my hands. I was walking down the corridor back to the main eating area when Elena and Jess rushed into the corridor. I asked them what was wrong. They explained that another man had joined that strange creeper, and the men were both pointing and staring at them, so they rightfully felt unsafe. We walked back into the eating area. I put my money on our table and explained to Lisa and Sarah that I was taking off, and I would explain what was going on fully when we got home. We all got into Elena's car and left those creeps in the car's rearview mirror. After a 2-minute drive, we reached my house. Just then, I remembered that I had been meaning to return something I had borrowed from my mother, so I asked if Elena could drive me to my parents' house, as she was going there anyway. I jumped out of the car to get what I needed, when suddenly my phone rang. It was Elena. She explained that a car had just driven past and pulled into a driveway. She said the driver of the vehicle was that same creep from Dunkin' Donuts. I took a peek out my window, and sure enough, there was a car which didn't belong to the owner of the house, parked right on their driveway. I ushered the girls into my home and locked the door. I instructed Elena to take a photo of the car and its license plate, while telling Jess to call 911. She gave the operator more information than I could. Elena took the photos and we sort of gathered around Jess as she was speaking to the operator. She had finished telling the story, and I heard the operator assure us the police would be at my house soon. Just a few minutes later, there was a loud knock at the front door, followed by a loud voice shouting, "It's the police!" We all breathed a sigh of relief as I went to open the door. Jess told the operator the police were there and went to hang up. I was just in the process of unlocking the door when I thought to look through the peephole at the top. I peered through, but what I saw was not a police officer. It was the same man. I froze in fear and didn't know what to say. We didn't call the police!" I managed to shout back at the man through the door. Elena and Jess were both very confused as to why I was doing this. We had a call, sir?" the man shouted back. "You must have the wrong address." I informed the girls it was the creep at the door and not an officer. Both were rightfully shocked and extremely scared, as was I. I was about to tell Jess to call the police again, until I heard the sirens. The man began to panic. "Sir, you have to let me in right now." This time I didn't answer. He was pounding on the door. His commands for me to let him in turned into pleading and begging. I heard the police car pull up and some commotion outside. An actual officer then knocked on the door, and I let him in. And yes, I did check the peephole first. The police officers took the man into custody, while another police officer took Elena and Jess into the dining room for some brief questioning. I called my parents, and Jess called hers. Both were here extremely quickly once we told them what had happened. The man was found with a kitchen knife on his person, and some other weapons in the car. Who knows what could have happened if I hadn't had the instinct to look through the peephole first. Both my sister and her friend are fine, although they are shaken up after the whole incident. So I, 20 and female, lived in a shady-as-hell apartment complex in an otherwise rich suburban area for 3 years, and I have a hell of a lot of stories that could fit here. But this one is about a neighbor I'll call Bob. A little bit of backstory. Me, 18 at the time, and my then 16-year-old sister used to babysit all of the neighborhood kids. These kids considered us their friends. It even got to the point where they seemed to have a radar of whenever me and my sister went outside. They'd come out and talk to us, and we let them ride our skateboards and such in the parking lot. The kids were all ages 8 through 13. So one day we were outside with them when we were suddenly joined by a stranger. He stood between us and our car, towering over us. He introduced himself and asked us to sign this petition he made up. We did, just being friendly. Then he asked us how old we were. I thought maybe he was a fellow teenager that perhaps looked just a bit older, or maybe he was just an awkward adult. So I told him I was 18. Of course, the very next question was if I wanted to go out with him, right in front of my mom and the other kids' moms as well. I awkwardly declined, but he continued talking about how he thought me and my sister were in middle school. Apparently, he was also 28. Eventually, he just kind of wandered away and asked someone else to sign his petition. A few days later, he knocked at our door after asking the neighbor for the address. He had a bag of what he said was chicken and wanted us to go eat it with him at the park. We declined and said we had schoolwork to do. He walked away, mumbling and grumbling about how antisocial everyone was. Later, we looked out our window and saw him playing baseball with 2 small girls. He kept physically moving their arms to different positions, even though they were clearly shrugging away from him. The next day, one of the little kids runs right up to me. I'll call her Maddie. She was 8. She had just gotten a new pair of Heelys and wanted to show off and have me help her with them. I was holding her hand and guiding her along when Bob appeared and said he could help better. Maddie said no, but he insisted. He actually pushed me out of the way and reached for Maddie, holding her tightly around the upper chest area. Her grandma was there too, and flipped out. He just sort of meandered away. The next day, Maddie was freaking out, saying Bob had been sitting on her porch when she left for school that morning. Her parents found out, and as they walked outside, he let himself in. He went into their kitchen and started making orange chicken. We later found out another neighbor had a similar story as well. Another time, we were helping a family move. They had a 2-year-old son. The garages are in a triangle shape to the road, almost like a roundabout. There's a flat patch of grass behind them. Well, here comes Bob to help us. He criticized the way we packed things and didn't help until our neighbor politely asked him to leave. Well, he left the garage, but instead of actually leaving, he asked the 2-year-old if he wanted to go off and play. When the kid said no, it made him angry. He picked up the kid to play, and the kid slapped him. He asked if the kid wanted to go behind the garages now. The kid's mom hadn't noticed yet, so I went with them and guided the kid back to his mom. The climax of this story is when my sister and I went on a walk with our 17-year-old friend and her other friend. Maddie ran up to us and wanted to come along. So here we are, starting our walk, when Bob comes out. He sees our friend and immediately asks how old she is and how much she weighs because she's so skinny. He asks where we're going, too. My friend tells him we're going for ice cream on a girls' trip. He got real mad and stomped away. We continued our walk, but halfway through, I got this weird feeling, so I looked behind us. Bob is sprinting towards us. He yells at us for hiding from him, while also telling Maddie how pretty she is. An older neighbor saw this and immediately asked what was going on. He told the man we were being mean, and he needed to go write a song about us or something. He left, but later we saw him sitting at the park. When he saw us, he instantly came running again. We stopped, and he asked us which one of us is over 18. Maddie's dad was there at this point, and told him we weren't interested in him. He exploded, telling the dad to fuck himself and various other rude things and expletives, also calling me a bitch. Maddie was crying, and the neighbor who saw us before rushed over to check on us since he'd seen Bob running. Bob went inside muttering to himself. For a few weeks, we didn't see him. A single dad and his 5-year-old daughter moved in, and we were introducing ourselves to them. My mom kind of tipped him off that there was someone in our building who was a little bit off, especially around Maddie. The dad said he'd seen someone like that giving candy to kids at the pool while they seemed uncomfortable. Here comes Bob as if on cue. He immediately tells the girl in front of her dad that she looks like a movie star and how pretty she is.
He asks to take her off and play with her, but the dad says no of course and they go inside. Turns out they were next door neighbors. We still didn't see him much, but the other neighbors were telling us all kinds of horrible stories about him. There was a woman who was alone most of the day with her 2 kids under 5, who told us he stared and watched her whenever she went to and from her car. Maddie's parents continued to see him watching her too. Then one day, again, we're babysitting, and here he comes, only this time he's swinging some nunchucks. Maddie screamed and hid in our car. He strolls over, nunchucks in hand, and starts talking to us all casual, but then he starts looking around. Where's Maddie? We told him she wasn't here, and he seemed to walk away. By then, most of the kids were afraid to go outside whenever they saw him. He had a habit of wandering around the complex. We could tell by his height and lanky gait. A few times, we'd see Bob with his dad. Those times, neither even glanced at us. Then one day, he just stopped showing up. We'd still see his dad and brother come in and out all the time, but we'd never see him. We only saw him again a year later, and it was only for one day near Christmas. Then he disappeared altogether. I really don't know what happened to him, but it was just one of those weird experiences with neighbors in the 3 years we lived there. Maybe I'll post the stories of a chick that wanted to kill her parents because she was a witch, or the old man that bit children next, if you want to hear them. Before we start, remember kids, stranger danger. If you don't know him, don't give him the time of day. This was about 15 years ago or so. My parents had gone out for a nice dinner for their anniversary, and decided that I was old enough and responsible enough to be left alone, at least just for a few hours on a weeknight. I was almost 9 at the time, and we owned a fairly protective dog as well, so what could possibly go wrong? They leave and tell me to lock up and call if anything happens. I do so and immediately proceed to party around the house like a rock star, because dude, I had the whole dang house to myself, and I could do whatever I wanted. Hell to the yeah. About halfway through a Sailor Moon marathon, I suddenly get a knock at the door. I was confused as all get out, because it had only been about 2 hours, and they had said they wouldn't be back until around 10 anyway. I guessed Mama had left something she needed behind again and swung around to grab it. My front door is a system of 2 doors, a super old, thick wooden one, from the house being originally built in the 30s, and then outside of that a screen door. My dog was raising absolute hell at the front door. I pulled her back a bit to try and calm her down because she had a tendency to be very reactive to almost any noise. Well, it was not my mom at the door. It was some middle-aged man I'd never seen before in my life. Puppo was now basically feral, so I kept the screen door firmly closed and a hand on her collar. I asked the man what he wanted. He started on in this weird convoluted story about how he had 2 young twin daughters and they'd gotten into a fight and one of them had run away. This man claimed that he believed his daughter was now hiding in my house and would like to come inside to look for her. I tell him immediately there is no such girl here. Why would he even think she would be here in the first place? He starts going in on this story about how this was the house they first lived in, and how it's the one she was born in. It was like a safe place for her or something, and would likely be the most likely place she would run away to, as it was really the only other place she knows. I had felt kinda weird at first when I opened the door slightly and heard this dude's story, and this stuff was absolutely not helping his cause, but now I definitely knew something shitty was about to go down. I, in no uncertain terms, informed the guy he must have the wrong house, because this house was built and has been lived in by my family since its very initial construction. My dad was born in this house, and after my mom and dad told his parents that they were pregnant with my older sister, they gave it to them as a present to begin their new family. He must be mistaken, because I knew all of this to be fact. Hell, there were pictures less than 10 feet away from me on the wall of my dad and uncle playing in the front yard in the late 70s. By now, my dog was growling like crazy, and the dude was getting extremely agitated. He insists that I have no idea what I'm talking about. If I would just give him a few minutes to search for his daughter, he could be on his way right away. The latch on the screen door was broken at the time, and I was putting all my strength into holding my dog from the door. He opened the screen door with one hand, and the other reached for my closest arm. All of a sudden, that crazy cocker goes fucking ballistic. She used all her strength to lunge at him, grabbed a hold of his hand, and bit down fiercely. Now the man was yelling and confused. He pushed back against the screen door and slammed it shut to get my dog off of him. Sadie got pushed back inside, but she was still raging away. I quickly slammed the front door and locked it, and chained it tight. I ran around the house and made sure all the other doors and windows were locked, and then hunkered down in the bathroom, hyperventilating. I waited about 15 minutes until Sadie's growling had calmed some. I check outside, no man or his car. Both were now long gone. I call my parents and tell them they need to come home right now, please. When they get home, I recount the whole story. My dad goes to check the front door, and sure enough, on the screen door jamb and siding of the house was a large handprint of blood. Sadie was treated like a queen and got a whole steak for her to eat that weekend. When I was 15, I was in a really bad mental headspace. With that being said, I was depressed, lonely, and desperate for anyone's attention. So, against my better judgment, I made an account on Plenty of Fish. I understand that I put myself in a dangerous position for predators, but I also understand that any man who I told my age to should have just reported my account and not spoken to me. But after swiping left and right for about an hour, I met a man who I'll call Red. Red was 26, a father of 2 beautiful toddlers, and a Puerto Rican native who had recently moved to Florida. He spoke a fair bit of English and had this charm to him whenever he spoke. When I told him my age, it's scary now to think about just how okay he was with it. He simply told me that we wouldn't have sexual relations, and our other interactions would be innocent. We talked for a few months before talking eventually about meeting up. When I talked to Red, I felt very happy, whole, like I finally had someone to support me. The first few times we met up, it was fine. We went to the outlets, Disney Springs, the movies. He was a perfect gentleman, held my hand, opened doors for me, and most importantly, kept his hands off me. Eventually, we did kiss a bit, but nothing too intense. About 6 months into our relationship, though, I turned 16, and I invited him to my house, through means of sneaking in through my window, of course, and he agreed. We were just hanging out watching a movie, when he kissed me in a way he never had before, in a way I'd never been kissed before. It was surprising, and without having to be said, very overwhelming. I suddenly got very scared. It finally hit me in that moment that this guy was a full-grown man and I was just a child. I got off my bed and told him he had to leave. His face immediately contorted into anger, and he stepped toward me, trying to convince me through gritted teeth not to force him to go. He reached out to grab my shoulders, and out of instinct I shoved his chest to make him back off, only for a very harsh shove to be returned. A sudden hot pain overwhelmed me, spreading from the back of my head and down the rest of my body. Then everything went black. The next thing I knew, I was hearing a blood-curdling scream. Hazed out and too weak to open my eyes fully, I could just barely make out my mom. I felt this wetness on my head, and my body felt so cold. It was just as I began to gather that something was very wrong, that I lost consciousness once again. The following time that I awoke was in a hospital bed. My head was pounding like crazy and aching in the back. I reached up to hazily feel where the pain was coming from, and my fingertips grazed a row of staples on a now bald patch on the left back of my head, making me wince. Things went by very fast from that point on. A doctor and my mother and father explained that I must have slipped and hit my head on the windowsill, being that that's where the first impact was made, before falling the rest of the way onto my tile floor. My mom had come into my room in the morning to wake me up for school and found me lying in a pool of my own blood. She thought I was dead because my breathing was so faint. But they had no idea as to why I had really slipped. I was too embarrassed and ashamed of myself to tell anyone. I didn't think I deserved justice for what Red did to me. Later on, I found out further obstacles would come from my injury, hearing loss in my right ear, as well as the inability to retain some old memories. This event and a few flash memories from my childhood are the last things that I remember from before the incident. Though I was saddened by this, I was happy to still be alive and never have to see Red again. Now being 18, a few months ago I signed up for Plenty of Fish again. I kept my wariness about me this time though, and didn't go on any dates. I looked out for warning signs this time, and upon the first one blocked just about everyone that messaged me. Then one day I received a new message. It was from Red. I had blocked him on every other platform, including his number. It just said, "Hey, how have you been?" I didn't respond, but I looked at his profile. It still said he was 26. How odd. Perhaps I never really knew his real age. Perhaps I didn't know this man at all, being that he thought he had killed me and selfishly ran off without even attempting to see if I was alive, or even if he could help me. Update. I've seen all the comments of people suggesting and demanding that I go to the police. I've already taken action on this a few months ago. I didn't include it in the original story because I didn't want to feel like a fool. I went to the police by myself after seeing him on Plenty of Fish again, and they had no records for anyone with his name or age. I gave a description, but it was just like the description of any generic Hispanic male, and they couldn't really take action on it. I had no pictures with him, and his Plenty of Fish pictures all had his face covered somehow. The first time I ever really saw his face was when we started Snapchatting. He used to have an Instagram, but I guess now it's been deleted. I even tried to tell them the names of his 2 toddlers, but they couldn't find anything with that either. Why I love cats, or at least one of the many reasons I love cats. I work about a mile from my house in a pretty small town, 100,000-ish, very spread out though. I grew up in one of the largest cities in the States, so living here has been kind of a bit of culture shock. It's very easily accessible by walking, so I pretty much never drive. About a half year ago, I had just finished work at around 1 a.m. Nobody is ever really out past 8 or so here, also a huge shock coming from that big city. So the park I walked through was utterly deserted. Mind you, I live in one of the safest countries in the world, not America anymore, so it's easy to forget just how vulnerable you can still be as a small female. I honestly didn't feel uncomfortable at any point of my walk, until I rounded the corner past some basketball courts nearby my house. I was still about 2 minutes away from home, and this stretch of my walk was pitch dark. The moon was massive that night. While I had welcomed its light at the beginning of my journey, in the absence of any streetlights, it actually made things look pretty eerie. I had walked this path before hundreds of times, but tonight for some reason, something felt off. I'm not a fearful person in any sense of the word, but I was suddenly really on edge. And then I saw it, a van in the parking lot next to the courts, with its side door wide open. I picked up my pace a little and kept an eye on that van. There are usually cars in that parking lot. I live in a tourist town and backpackers often stay in their vehicles to save money. But I had never seen one with its door hanging open like that in the middle of the night. Not ever. I was so focused on that van that I missed a man walking out from the trees near the courts until he was a mere 30 feet behind me. He was walking incredibly fast, and there was very little doubt that he was heading straight towards me. I was at a complete loss for what my next action should be. Not like screaming would do much. I was still too far away from any residences. I usually carry a glass water bottle with me for protection. We have very strict laws on weapons here. But it turns out I had forgotten it at work that night. My phone was completely dead. Everything I knew better than to do, I had done that night. And as stupid as I feel writing this, I hesitated to run away, on the off chance that maybe he didn't mean to act so sketchy. I've moved past this mindset overall since, but there's still a strong part of me that balks at the prospect of making someone feel uncomfortable or embarrassed. I also hate showing men that I feel scared of them, because even if they hurt me, I'd rather not give them any satisfaction of seeing my fear. Also, I kind of knew in my heart that I probably couldn't outrun this guy with the speed he was walking. I was overthinking every little thing. I saw a little dark blur darting across the library parking lot at the back of the courts. I didn't even register what it was at first. The whole situation was so surreal. The guy was behind me now, and judging by his footsteps, he had not veered course at all. I quickened my pace a little, felt out my keys in my purse, and slipped them in between my fingers. I heard a slight jingling noise, and then everything suddenly made sense. That blur I'd seen was Apollo, a large black cat that often walked with me on the home stretch after the park. Tonight, he was doing that weird cat run, where they got real low to the ground with their ears hung back. I had an impression he was very angry, but he was moving too fast for me to see his face properly as he rushed right past me. I kept on walking at my fast speed, but suddenly I could hear the heavy footsteps were now retreating. I didn't dare to look back and kept moving forward as quickly as possible. Apollo suddenly appeared by my side, still staying low to the ground, and stopping every few feet to look behind him and hiss. Then he would do his weird cat run to catch back up with me. He walked the entire way home with me as he had done many times, but I had never seen him act like that. As we neared my gate, he visibly relaxed and flopped onto his back. I coaxed him inside before giving him some big hugs and head bumps. After that, I stopped walking home by myself at night, and still saw my sweet little cat friend very often. I never saw him behave that way again, though. Apollo unfortunately moved away 3 months ago. I still miss my little buddy and often think about how strange that night was. I wish I'd turned around to see what he did to chase the guy off. I've heard many stories about dogs protecting people, but rarely ever any about cats. My own little girl would never do anything like what Apollo did. So, to the parking lot creeper, let's not mate. And to Apollo, I hope to meet you again one day. From 2006 to 2011, I worked in the electronics department at the local Walmart in the small city I lived in. Throughout those 5 years I had worked there, I had plenty of creepy encounters with strange customers, especially considering the state hospital was just across the road. This story isn't just a regular old creepy encounter though, but something that would lead to me being stalked for nearly an entire year. It all started in 2010, on a night I was working second shift. I was doing my end shift ritual when a woman in her late 40s interrupted me. She was there with a little girl, must have been no older than 3 or 4. Excuse me, I need help with my cell phone? She spoke very softly and proceeded to tell me her problem. I need to turn my phone into a straight talk phone. The girl earlier said you could do it? Oh, fucking of course she did. I thought that to myself at least, but my lips instead said, "Sure, let's see what I can do." She handed me a 6-year-old phone from Verizon, and I knew as soon as I saw it that I would not be able to do what she wanted. I explained she would have to buy a new phone from Straight Talk and transfer her old number. Pretty basic shit, really. Now, I always took my job very seriously, and held myself to the highest possible standard of customer service. I would often receive letters to the store from customers complimenting me, so I assure you I did nothing to actually piss off this lady, but sure as shit she was hella pissed. Why the hell would I want to buy a new phone? I already have one. She started screaming at the top of her lungs, her claims being of me upselling her and being a corporate goon. I finally managed to defuse the situation, and as she left the department, she gave me the classic, "You'll never get a job in this town again." As I'm getting ready to leave my shift, my manager stops me and tells me I just got a complaint at customer service from a lady claiming I swore at her granddaughter. Apparently, I'd told her to fuck off. I explained what really happened, of course, and my manager just laughed it off. He knew it was very unlike me to ever say anything like that to a customer. I wish the story ended there, but then of course I wouldn't be writing this. For the next several weeks, I would get complaints about things I'd never done, sometimes even on my days off. I would come into questions from my management nearly every day. It was all complaints ranging from me being rude to a customer, all the way to me doing drugs in the parking lot on break. All of these complaints were of course coming from two women. As it turned out, it was cell phone lady and her adult daughter. It turns out they had even been scoping out my work schedule and started coming in nearly every day. They would walk through electronics to make sure they saw me and I was there. And then later that very same night, I would have a new complaint. This happened for months. It happened so much, management deemed her my favorite customer. To be honest though, I didn't care much. Actually, I even thought it was pretty funny and a bit pathetic. I never got in trouble, and everyone knew these ladies and just blew it off. I started caring though when she took it to a whole new level. She started to follow me around. I would see her when I was around town. She started to make it clear she knew where I lived and would regularly start to walk by my house. I would see her standing out front, just staring into my place. I began getting complaints to the city about my property. Grass too tall, old shed in my yard, my fire pit, basically everything. She even found out my girlfriend's name and began complaining at her job too. I knew it was her. She would make it so clear and obvious she was following me. Sometimes she would stop in and ask me questions at work and act like the nicest customer. Then she'd drop hints like, "How's your girlfriend?" Or my favorite, "How can you afford that big house on your little Walmart wage?" For about 7 months, she stalked and slandered me. I started telling her I knew what she was doing and to stop, but she played it off and I couldn't report her. After all, she'd never once threatened me. She was just making my life very hard. By this time, everyone in my life knew about this nut job. One night, I'm grabbing dinner with my friends from work and we're joking about it, when someone offers a suggestion. "Well, what if you just counter-stalk her?" At first, I thought it was a terrible idea, but they convinced me it would work, and they would all help me. So we hatched a big plan like something you'd read on Pro Revenge. And it went as follows. Find her job, find her name, find her address, make complaints in the same manner as her, find out all the rumors she's told about me, make it clear we know, and show her that unlike her, we have numbers. I found out her information easily enough. Turns out she didn't live anywhere near me. And it also turned out I was friends with a few of her coworkers. They would keep me informed on the crazy shit she said about me and even try to rein her in. And we began doing exactly what she was doing to me. We did this for about 4 months. The more we dug into her life, the more I found out about just how obsessed she was over getting me in trouble. She'd made reports I assaulted her. She encouraged others to falsely report me and follow me too. She told police I was a potential drug dealer. In the end, we won though. She started putting together that there were 6 of us digging deep into her life and asking many questions about her. My last month at work, I didn't get a single complaint. In fact, I never saw her anymore. The day after I quit though, I heard she started in the store complaining about a new person after asking one of the managers why I quit. I honestly will never understand why she was so hell-bent on trying to destroy me. I just told her to buy a $20 prepaid phone. For some background, I live in the UK and go to school with a uniform. I go to quite a large all-girls school with about 8 classes of 30 or so per year, with 5 years and a 6th form attached. So I've heard about creeps lingering outside of the school before. Usually though, they're sorted out quite quickly by the school staff. At the time, I was in year 9, so just turning 13 and about 4'9". I had a big homework assignment due at the time, and because I didn't have a computer at home, I often stayed late at school to do it in the ICT suite. As it was the beginning of the school year, it got relatively dark at around 5 p.m., which is right around when I got out of school, and right around the time this event took place. I had to catch the bus to get home as both of my parents would work. The bus stop outside my school was fairly busy, and there were a couple of other people and me at the time. I had my back up against a fence when I noticed a man under the bus stop, facing away but next to the road, opposite the fence I was leaning on. I was very aware of my surroundings, as I have had previous experiences with old creeps, and I'm just a generally paranoid person anyway. The man didn't strike me as particularly interesting, but I did notice him glancing over at me from the very corner of my eye. I then saw a bus coming, and assumed that it was mine, so I stepped forward to check. Turned out it wasn't my bus, which was annoying, as I was very cold and didn't have a coat with me at the time. As I went to step back up against the fence, I almost stood right back into the man that had been under the bus stop originally. He had moved to directly behind where I was. He had his arm up against the pole next to the bus stop, telling you the buses that come by. I felt a bit concerned, but I couldn't move, as on the other side all the people were waiting to get on the bus that was now coming. It felt like forever, as I could feel this man's breath on the top of my head. I watched the bus come and collect all of the other people at the bus stop. It probably only took a minute and a half. Once the very last person got on that bus, I quickly moved out of this man's area and back against the fence. He moved so he was back under the bus stop, sitting across from me and staring at the ground in front of me. At last, my bus came after about 3 minutes in that state. I didn't want to give away the fact that I was getting on this bus immediately, but I had to wave it down, so I stood next to the road to signal it over. As I started to get on, my heart was going crazy, as the man had somehow snuck back behind me. I had already gotten my bus card out and scanned it very quickly, and only saw a few people on there. Normally, there might be a few people upstairs on the bus in this case, so that's where I headed. That was probably my biggest success of the incident. Or mistake, I don't really know, to be honest. I got up there and it was completely empty. Great. Well, I couldn't exactly go back down at this point. I knew the man had already gotten on and would be coming up the stairs soon, so I did the next best thing I could think of. I sat in the outside seat directly in front of the bus's camera, which I kept looking directly at just in case something happened. The man did follow me upstairs as expected. He sat right at the back of the bus, but not before looking at me as he passed by. It was then that I got the idea that probably saved me that night. I live on a very quiet street and it was already very dark now, so there was no way I was getting off this bus at my stop with this man. I pulled out my phone and earbuds. I put one bud in my ear and texted my best friend to play along. I FaceTimed her and quietly informed her of the situation. She understood everything. And along with some small talk, I talked loudly and at length about how my mom was so mad I'd stayed late at school, and she had just texted me saying she was waiting at the door for me. I had told her I was only 10 minutes away. In reality though, I had told my mom earlier that day that I was staying late in the morning before I left for school, and now my mom was long gone at work, at least 45 minutes away. My dad was gone even farther, about an hour and a half, and neither had access to their phones at work. Now we arrived at my stop and I had to get off. I took a deep breath as I stood up. I looked back at the man. He was staring at me as I walked down the stairs. My friend was screen recording everything at this point just in case something happened to me. Thankfully, he didn't follow me down at first, but as I was walking away from the bus, I looked back to see him pressed up against the back window, hands in fists and staring at me once more. That's when I took my flimsy school shoes off and sprinted to my house, as the next bus stop was still in eyesight. There were two on the main road that led down to my street. Once I was down my street and far enough away that you couldn't see the top of it anymore, I told my friend about him up against the window. She understood. I put my shoes back on and speed walked the rest of the way to my house. My family still doesn't know about this, even though I was quite proud of myself on how I handled the situation, and how I ran so far with no shoes on, a heavy skirt and a big rucksack on my back. I don't think they'll ever know, because as much as I don't want to ever stay late at school ever again, I know I probably will have to again at some point, and I don't want my parents to feel guilty about not being able to help it if something more serious was to happen while they were at work. I'll note that I did tell the friend on the story and the rest of the people that I knew. I asked my sister because I knew she would understand, and she said I should tell my parents. I think I will eventually. I've been in 2 bad car accidents. I know the rush of adrenaline going through your head when you're in a crash. For that reason, I always pull over at any crash I see to at least try and help out, unless I know emergency services are there already. I have a level head, basic medical training, and usually have a first aid kit on me as well. Normally everything is fine, and I leave once the EMS and police show up. Today, that changed. I came around the bend while driving and saw a pickup truck had slammed into a tree. A body was slumped over in the seat. I immediately pulled my bike into the subdivision right across the street and ran over, shirking off my bag, jacket, and helmet. I see a white man, maybe 20s, slim frame, slumped over in the seat convulsing, with saliva dripping down the side of his face. My brain instantly went to he's having a seizure. The car who was a bit behind me had also pulled over, and the driver was on the phone with 911 right next to me. He tapped on the window a bit, and there was no response. We checked if any of the doors were unlocked, and I jumped into the bed to see if the back window was either. None of them were. I hopped out and went to see if anything had changed. The driver was now no longer convulsing, but he was still unresponsive. I tried knocking on the window once more to see if he had come out of it yet. The driver jumped up and began panicking. Pretty common for someone who's just had a seizure, especially if they had a traumatic experience on top of it. He began to yell and lightly punch the window. This all happened in the span of about a second, which meant I jumped nearly 20 feet in the air in surprise. Once my brain cleared for a second though, I loudly asked if he was alright, and if he would be able to unlock the door. Luckily for me, he didn't understand a word I said. He slumped back over, which prompted me to knock in concern once again. He jumped back up and began immediately freaking out. After a moment, he calmed down and sat there, smiling. It wasn't a normal smile though. It was sorta haunting. His tongue was hanging out and it was extremely yellowed. The man who'd pulled over with me, Mark, came around, which brought another round of freaking out. This began the pattern of any new stimuli at all causing him to lash out. A third person pulled over and came to check in as well. He quickly came to the same conclusion. Drugs, I guess. Our driver was now in a relaxed state once more, until the sirens started. Me and the third person, whose name I never caught unfortunately, began directing traffic, while Mark kept an eye on the driver, relaying everything to 911. I had moved my jacket, helmet, and bag over to near my bike, just in case he decided to start driving again or something. Finally, about a minute after we first heard the sirens, a fire truck, ambulance, and the sheriff all pulled up. The fire truck blocked traffic from one end, after briefly talking to the cop. Mark went to start turning cars around in the other direction. A cop pulled up from the end, blocked by the fire truck. The two cops, determining that the driver was in a combative state, drew their tasers. A firefighter used a pick to break open the driver's side rear window. After the first hit, the driver began to claw at the back window. Once it had been pulled out, the cops began yelling at him to open the door. Par for the course, the driver didn't understand a word. They decided to smash the front window as well. After the first hit, they didn't have to do much, because the driver immediately began hitting back. He punched out the window entirely, as the cops yelled some more. The driver was yelling, punching at everything, so the first cop tased him. If we hadn't heard the crackling, we'd not have even known it had worked. He was still swinging away. The second cop tased him. Still nothing. First cop again, second cop again. As the first cop tased him again with the marking of a fifth tasing, the second cop opened the door. The driver began kicking, punching, and scratching while getting dragged out of the car. The cops attempted to hold him down, but apparently drugs are a hell of a drug. The largest of the firefighters had to join in as well, just to be able to hold him down. Around this time, 6 more cop cars flew up, and they all ran over to assist. After here, though, it gets a bit boring. Mark and I had to stick around to be interviewed by the highway patrol officer, who would be investigating the wreck. I guess it just goes to show that driving under the influence is not a very good idea.
What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in the comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with, and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.